The window exploded inward. I was already moving before the glass hit the floor, not because I was brave, because 4 years of living alone in downtown Chicago had taught me that the half-second between hearing a sound and understanding it was the only half-second that mattered. I threw myself behind the couch, felt the leather shudder as something punched through it, and pressed my face into the hardwood. 6 men came through the fire escape. I could hear them by the way they moved boots on broken glass, the click of safeties, the professional silence of people who had done this before. They weren't robbers. Robbers make noise. These men made none. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with shaking hands. Restricted number. One I hadn't seen in 4 years. One I had deleted from my contacts 3 times and memorized anyway. I answered it. Rowan. The voice was deep, calm, and absolutely certain. Jump out the front window. Now. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't ask why. I knew that voice the way you know your own heartbeat, not because you listen for it, but because you'd notice the moment it stopped. Alpha Killian. The man who raised me. The man who threw me away. I ran. Gunfire chewed through the drywall behind me. I felt something hot graze my shoulder, but I was already at the open front window, the freezing Chicago air rushing in, 4 stories of nothing between me and the street below. I jumped. I didn't fall. A hand caught me midair, someone swinging in on a line, military grade, precise. He hauled me into a helicopter that was hovering between the buildings like it belonged there. The doors slammed shut. The noise stopped. The city dropped away beneath us. I lay on the metal floor, bleeding from a dozen glass cuts, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what had just happened to my entirely human, entirely normal, entirely independent life. We banked north, toward Michigan, toward the place I had spent 4 years trying to forget. Toward him. I should explain. I was orphaned at 8. I don't remember much smoke, screaming, arms carrying me through something that was on fire. The next thing I knew, I was in a stone house the size of a castle, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like cedar and pine, and a man was looking down at me with silver eyes that gave away nothing. Alpha Killian was 22 then, already the head of Bloodwood Pack, already feared across every territory in North America. People called him the Butcher of the North, and they said it the way you'd say the name of a storm, not with anger, but with the quiet understanding that some things were simply beyond argument. He took me in. He gave me tutors, clothes, a room with a lock on the inside. He set up a trust fund I didn't know about until years later. He gave me every material thing a child could need. He never once hugged me. The first night in that stone house, I asked him if I could sleep with the light on. He looked at me for a long moment, then walked out and came back with a lamp. Not a nightlight, a proper reading lamp, heavy, brass, the kind that belonged on a desk. He set it on the table beside my bed without a word and left. I kept that lamp for 10 years. I still don't know if it was kindness or efficiency. The house had rules. I learned them quickly because the alternative was silence, and Killian's silence was worse than any punishment. Dinner at 7, lights out at 10, no entering the West Wing, no asking about the scars on his hands, no asking about my parents, no asking about the fire. I broke the last rule once, when I was 12. I found him in his study late at night and asked him what happened to my mother and father. He set down his pen. He looked at me. And for 1 second, one fraction of a second, something moved behind his eyes that I couldn't name. Then it was gone. They died, he said. I'm sorry. But how? That's all I can tell you, Rowan. He picked up his pen. The conversation was over. I went back to my room and cried into the brass lamp until I fell asleep. The staff loved me in the way that staff love any child in a big house carefully, with professional warmth, always aware that the man who owned the walls was watching. Mrs. Calloway, the head of household, would sometimes leave cookies outside my door with a note that said, "Don't tell the Alpha." I never told him. I think he knew anyway. What I remember most about those years isn't the coldness. It's the almost. The time he walked into the kitchen while I was doing homework and stood there for a full minute, watching, before turning and leaving without a word. The birthday, when I found a first edition book on my desk, my favorite, The one I'd mentioned once in passing 6 months earlier with no card, no note, no acknowledgement. The night I had a fever and woke to find a glass of water beside my bed that hadn't been there when I fell asleep, and the chair across the room was still warm. He was always almost there, close enough to know, too far to reach. Not when I woke screaming from nightmares about fire, not when I brought home perfect grades hoping he'd smile. Not on birthdays, not on holidays, not on the nights I sat outside his office door just wanting to hear his voice through the wood. He was ice. He was duty. He was a wall I couldn't climb, no matter how hard I tried. The summer I turned 15, Killian took me to the northern boundary of the territory. It was the only time we ever did anything that could be called spending time together. He said it was educational. He said I needed to understand the land. We walked for 3 hours in silence. He pointed out territorial markers, explained the patrol routes, described the history of each boundary stone. He spoke about it the way he spoke about everything precisely, without emotion, as if the world was a series of problems to be managed. At one point, we stopped at a ridge overlooking a river valley. The sun was setting, and the light turned the water gold. I sat on a rock, and he stood beside me, and for maybe 5 minutes, neither of us spoke. It was the most peaceful I had ever felt in that house. "Killian?" I said. "What? Do you ever get lonely?" He looked at me. Not through me, not past me at me. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then he turned back to the valley. "We should head back," he said. "It gets cold after dark." He walked ahead. I followed. And I told myself that the 2 seconds he had looked at me were enough, even though they weren't. Because when you're 15 and you love someone who can't love you back, you learn to survive on almost nothing. When I turned 18, he called me into his office. He didn't look up from his desk. He slid a thick envelope across the mahogany college funds, emancipation papers, everything I needed to start a life that didn't include him. "The car will take you to the airport in the morning," he said. "That's it?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He picked up his pen and went back to whatever document was more important than I was. I left the next morning. I didn't look back. I told myself I wouldn't cry, and I lied. 4 years later, I was 22. Running my own graphic design agency in Chicago, paying my own rent, managing a team of creatives, drinking overpriced lattes, and pretending that I hadn't built my entire adult identity around proving to a man who would never see it that I was worth keeping. The therapy helped. The work helped more. I was almost okay. Almost. I built the agency from a laptop in a studio apartment that smelled like Thai food from the restaurant below. My first client was a dentist's office that needed a logo. I charged them $300 and spent 40 hours on it because I didn't know yet that my time was worth more than my fear of failure. By year 2, I had an office, a team of 4, and a client list that included 2 mid-sized tech companies. By year 3, I was turning down work. People said I had a gift for design. What I actually had was an obsessive need to prove that I could build something permanent, because the only permanent thing I'd ever had was taken from me on an 18-year-old's birthday by a man who didn't bother looking up from his desk. I went on dates. I want to be honest about that. I tried. There was a project manager named James who was kind and patient and exactly the sort of person a therapist would call a healthy choice. We lasted 4 months. He ended it gently, over coffee, and said something I've never forgotten. "You're not unavailable, Rowan. You're just already taken. You just don't know by who." I told him he was wrong. I believed it at the time. I was an idiot. There were nights 2, 3 in the morning when the city was finally quiet, when I would sit at my desk under the brass lamp and feel a pull in my chest that I couldn't explain. Not pain, exactly. More like the feeling of standing in a room where something used to be. A phantom limb for a life I never actually had. I didn't know what it was then. Now I know. The bond was already there, dormant, waiting. It had been waiting since I was 8 years old. And then someone blew up my window. The helicopter set down on the frozen helipad at Bloodwood. I could see the estate through the ice-covered glass, the same stone walls, the same dark pines, the same sky that always looked like it was thinking about snowing. The doors opened and the Michigan winter hit me like a fist. I was wearing silk pajamas and a cardigan. I hadn't exactly packed. He was standing on the tarmac, 32 years old, over 6'4". black overcoat in the rotor wash. His face was exactly as I remembered it, sharp, composed, and giving away absolutely nothing. His silver eyes tracked me the way they'd always tracked me, the way a man watches something he's responsible for. I climbed down the steps. My legs were shaking. My bare foot hit a patch of ice and I pitched forward, arms out, bracing for the impact. He caught me, his hands closed around my waist, bare skin against the thin fabric, and everything changed. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't a slow dawning. It was a detonation. Something ancient and enormous ripped through both of us at the same time. Not a sound, not a feeling, but something deeper, something that lived in the blood and the bone and the marrow. The mate bond. The world flooded with scent. Pine, sandalwood, winter snow. His scent, filling my lungs like I'd been breathing wrong my entire life, and only now understood what air was supposed to taste like. His hands tightened on my waist. I looked up at his face. His eyes were wide, not with joy, with horror. He shoved me away, hard. He stumbled backward on the ice, his hands curling into fists so tight his knuckles split and bled. His chest heaved. His wolf was right there, right behind his eyes. I could see the silver flickering to gold and back. "Get away from me," he said. "Killian. Stay away from me, Rowan." He turned and ran. The legendary Butcher of the North, the most feared alpha on the continent, ran from a 22-year-old woman in pajamas. His guards stared. Nobody moved. I stood in the snow, shaking, the bond singing in my blood like a live wire, demanding I follow him, demanding I go to him. The tears froze on my face before they reached my chin. He had done it again. He had looked at me and decided I wasn't worth staying for. On the first day, I tried to find him. The West Wing was locked. Every door, every corridor. A guard named Marcus, who I remembered from childhood, stood at the main entrance with the expression of a man who had been given an order he disagreed with, but would follow anyway. "He doesn't want to see you, Miss Ashbrook." "Marcus, I've known you since I was 9. "He doesn't want to see you, Rowan." Softer now. Almost apologetic. "Give him time." I went to the kitchen instead. Mrs. Calloway was still there, older, grayer, still leaving cookies. She set a cup of tea in front of me and sat down across the table. "How bad is it?" I asked. "I've worked for that man for 20 years, she said carefully. "I've never heard sounds like the ones coming from that wing. Is he hurting himself?" She didn't answer. She just pushed the cookies closer. On the second night, I couldn't sleep. The bond was a physical thing now. A pull in my chest, like a rope attached to my sternum, always tugging toward the West Wing. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, and thought about all the things I wanted to say to him. I practiced them in my head, calm, rational sentences. "We need to talk about this like adults. I understand the complexity. I'm not a child anymore." But somewhere around 3 in the morning, when the wolf howling in the West Wing reached a pitch that vibrated in my molten bones, all the rational sentences dissolved, and what was left was simpler and harder. I missed him. I had missed him for 4 years, and the bond hadn't created that. It had only given it a name. On the 3rd morning, I found claw marks on the wall outside my door. 4 deep gouges in the stone, at shoulder height for a man his size. He had come to my door in the night. He had stood there, and then he had dragged his claws down the wall and walked away. I pressed my fingers into the grooves. They were still warm. On the 3rd morning, a note appeared under my door. His handwriting sharp, angular, the kind of handwriting that comes from a man who learned to write with the same precision he learned to fight. "I will explain everything when I can. Please be patient. I am sorry for the noise." I held that note for a long time. It was the most he had said to me in 4 years, and it included the word sorry, which I was fairly certain he had never used before in his life. 3 days. 3 days of locked doors, rerouted hallways, meals delivered to separate wings, 3 days of catching his scent in a corridor and feeling my whole body lean toward it before my mind caught up. 3 days of lying in a guest bed at 2 in the morning, listening to the sounds coming from the West Wing, his wolf, clawing at the walls, destroying furniture, howling in a frequency I felt in my teeth. He was fighting it, fighting the bond, fighting the thing that every wolf story I'd ever heard described as sacred, beautiful, inevitable. He was treating it like a disease. I knew the complication. I wasn't naive about it. He had raised me. There was a power dynamic there that couldn't be ignored. We weren't blood-related, not even close, but the history mattered. The psychology of it mattered. And yet, every time his scent reached me, my body didn't care about psychology. It cared about him. On the fourth night, I decided I was done waiting. The blizzard outside was screaming. Killian was out patrolling the borders, trying to exhaust his wolf in the deep snow. I crept through the hallway, barefoot, silent, and picked the lock on his office door. Chicago had taught me a few things they don't put in the brochures. I expected to find military files, financial ledgers, pack business. I turned on the desk lamp. The entire desk was covered in files about me. My agency, my client list, my lease, my daily schedule. I picked up a folder with trembling hands and opened it. Bank transfers. Anonymous ones. Millions of dollars fed quietly into my business during the first 2 years when I was struggling to make payroll and too proud to ask anyone for help. I hadn't built my agency alone. He had been there the whole time, invisible, making sure I never hit the ground. I picked up another stack, security reports, daily ones, 4 years of them. Rowan boarded the L train at 8:05 a.m. No hostile presence detected. Rowan had coffee at the corner cafe. Unknown male approached. Operatives intercepted. Target is safe. Every day. Every single day for 4 years. While I was in therapy learning to hate him, he was paying people to make sure I got home alive. I pulled open the bottom drawer, broke the lock, found a leather journal underneath old maps. The entry was dated 4 years ago, the night before my 18th birthday. The ink was smeared in places, as if something wet had fallen on the page. Her 18th birthday is tomorrow. My wolf is losing control. It recognizes her soul. She is my mate. The goddess has either cursed me or blessed me, I don't know which. But she is a girl who has only known these walls, my rules, and my reputation. If I keep her here, if I look at her tomorrow when her adult scent blooms, my instincts will force the bond. She will have no choice. She will accept me because I am the only authority she has ever known. I will not do that to her. She deserves freedom. She deserves to choose. I must make her hate me. I must send her away, even if she never chooses me. I knelt on the floor of his office, holding the journal against my chest, and I wept. He didn't throw me away because he didn't want me. He threw me away so that wanting him would be my choice, not my cage. The explosion hit the foundation of the house like a hammer. The windows blew inward. Alarms screamed. The estate shook, and I could hear, even through the stone, the sound of hundreds of boots on frozen ground. Killian came through the shattered office window. Not the door, the window. His clothes were in ribbons. His chest was covered in blood, most of it not his. He wasn't looking at me with distance now. He was looking at me with terror. He grabbed my hand and shoved me behind him. "Alpha Council," he said. "They found you." "Found me? I'm nobody." He looked at me over his shoulder, and for the first time in my life, I saw everything he'd been hiding. "No, Rowan, you're not." We fought through the hallways. Killian tore through the mercenaries like paper, shielding me with his body, clearing every corridor before letting me follow. He was everything his reputation promised. Fast, brutal, precise, and utterly terrifying. But there were too many. They pushed us back into the foyer, surrounded. Dozens of armed enforcers, silver weapons gleaming. A scarred, graying wolf named Valerius stepped over the bodies of Killian's guards. He was smiling. "Hand over the Silvermane girl, Killian," he said. "Give us the royal blood, and we spare your pack." I froze. Silvermane, the ancient royal pack, massacred 20 years ago. Every wolf child learned the story, the fire, the tragedy, the bloodline that ended in a single night. "You will have to kill me first, Valerius," Killian said. And then he looked at me. Not over his shoulder this time. He turned fully, and his eyes were not cold. They were not distant. They were filled with something I had waited 14 years to see. "Rowan, listen to me. There is a tunnel beneath the study floor. You need to run. I'm not running. You don't understand. You are the last surviving heir of the Silvermane bloodline. The council didn't just find you, they slaughtered your parents when you were 8. They killed them to steal the throne. I found you in the rubble. I took you. I let the entire world believe I did it. I let them call me the butcher so the council would think the royal line was dead and stop hunting. The room went very quiet. 14 years. He had carried that lie for 14 years. He had destroyed his own name, his own reputation, his own chance at a normal life. He had endured being called a monster by every pack on the continent. For me, I looked at him bleeding, exhausted, standing between me and an army with nothing left but his body and his willingness to use it. I was not 8 years old anymore. I'm not running, I said again. Rowan, please. I stepped out from behind him. My voice came out steady, carrying a weight I hadn't known was in me, something old, something inherited, something that had been sleeping in my blood for 22 years. I am not running away ever again. The mercenaries shifted. Valerius took a half step back, not because of anything I did, because of what they heard in my voice. I walked up to Killian. I took his face in my hands. His eyes were desperate, terrified, pleading. You don't get to push me away anymore, I said quietly. I'm an adult, I know the truth, and this is my choice. I bit down on the curve of his neck. Hard. His blood tasted like pine, and winter and home. The bond locked into place. What happened next, I can only describe as waking up. Something inside me that had been dormant my entire life opened its eyes. A wave of golden light exploded outward from both of us. Not metaphorical, not symbolic, but actual visible light that blew the front doors off their hinges and drove every armed mercenary in the foyer to their knees. The Silvermane bloodline, awakened, bonded, complete. Killian shifted. His wolf was enormous, dark as charcoal, twice the size of any alpha I had ever seen. The bond was feeding him, healing his wounds, multiplying his strength, making him something beyond what he had been before. We fought together, him in wolf form, me with the golden light pouring from my hands like a shield. It lasted less than 10 minutes. The Council's elite force, the most feared military power in the supernatural world, broke against us like water on rock. Valerius died last. He died surprised. The aftermath was quieter than the battle. Pack members emerged from the shelters beneath the estate families, children, elderly wolves who had hidden in the reinforced tunnels Killian had built years ago for exactly this kind of night. They came out into the snow and stared at the bodies, at the broken doors, at the golden light that was still fading from my hands. A woman I didn't recognize walked up to me. She was holding a baby. She didn't bow. She didn't kneel. She just looked at me with clear, steady eyes and said, "Thank you." It was the first time anyone had ever thanked me for what I was instead of what I did. Marcus, the guard who had turned me away from the West Wing 3 days ago, was sitting against a wall with a field dressing on his arm. He looked up at me. "So," he said, "Silvermane." "Apparently." "That explains a lot, actually." He paused. "You still like cookies?" I laughed. It came out wet and shaky and not at all dignified for a newly awakened Royal Luna, but it was real, and Marcus grinned, and for one moment the world felt like it might be okay. Killian found me an hour later, standing alone in the foyer, looking at the place where the doors used to be. He had shifted back. Someone had given him a coat. His wounds were healed, but he moved stiffly, the way a man does when the damage was deep enough to remember even after it's gone. He stood beside me, not touching, not quite close enough, the same almost distance that had defined my entire childhood. "You should have run," he said quietly. "Probably. I had a plan. The tunnel leads to a safe house in Killian." He stopped. "I read your journal." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard in that house. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He stood perfectly still, the way he had always stood when he was deciding how much of himself to show. "All of it?" he asked. "All of it." Another silence. Then, very quietly, "I'm sorry, I never hugged you." I didn't say anything for a while. There was too much in that sentence to respond to quickly. The lamp, I finally said. The brass one you brought me the first night. Was that you, or did you send someone? It was mine, he said. It was on my desk. I didn't have a nightlight. You gave me your desk lamp. You were scared. I turned to look at him. His face was doing the thing it always did, holding everything back, controlling every muscle, showing nothing. But his eyes were wet. I would have chosen you, I said. If you'd let me choose at 18, I would have chosen you. You didn't have to send me away. You would have chosen me because you didn't know anything else. That's not a choice. That's a lack of options. And now? Now you've seen the world. You've built a life. You've succeeded without me. He paused. Now it counts. I took his hand. He flinched. Not away from me, toward me. The flinch of a man who wanted something so badly that receiving it felt like pain. It counts, I said. The surviving mercenaries dropped their weapons and knelt. Not to Killian, to me. That was 6 months ago. I still run my design agency. I refused to give it up, and Killian never asked me to. I split my time between Chicago boardrooms and Michigan pack halls. And if anyone thinks that's strange, they've learned not to say so. Killian looks at me every morning the way a man looks at something he thought he'd lost forever. He supports my independence without question. He defers to my judgment in pack matters without ceremony. He is, in every way that counts, the opposite of the cold wall I grew up believing he was. Last week, I found a note on his desk. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It was dated 4 years ago, the day after he sent me away. She left this morning. The house is quiet in a way I didn't know a house could be quiet. I did the right thing, I know that. But knowing it and surviving it are not the same. I put the note back where I found it. I didn't mention it. Some wounds don't need to be opened. They just need to be understood. I kept the brass lamp. It sits on my desk in the Chicago office now, next to my laptop and a framed photo of the Bloodwood estate in winter. My team thinks it's a vintage antique I picked up at a flea market. I let them think that. Some things don't need explaining. They just need to be kept. Killian called me last Tuesday while I was in a client meeting. I stepped out to take it, because I always step out to take his calls. And my team has learned not to comment on the fact that the only person who can pull their boss out of a pitch meeting is someone they've never met. Mrs. Calloway wants to know if you're coming home this weekend, he said. Home, he said it without hesitation now. It had taken him 3 months to stop calling it the estate and start calling it what it was. Tell her yes, and tell her to make the cookies. She already has. I could hear him almost smiling. I had learned to hear it, the micro shift in his voice, the breath that came half a beat too late. Other people heard the butcher of the North. I heard the man who gave a scared child his desk lamp because he didn't have a nightlight and couldn't think of what else to do. There is a difference between a man who uses his power to keep you and a man who breaks his own heart to set you free. The first is common. The second is the reason I stopped running.